La Dama Blanca, the woman who waits by the water. Written by Mikey of Saltline Studio. The church bells of San Sebastian tolled 7 times as Capitán Alejandro Mendoza crossed the plaza for what he believed would be the last time. The evening light fell amber and heavy across the cobblestones, catching the dust that rose from his horse's hooves in slow, golden spirals. Behind him, the village settled into the rituals of dusk. Shutters drawn, candles lit, prayers murmured against the coming dark. He did not look back. 3 years of war had taught Alejandro many things. How to read the silence before an ambush. How to sleep with one hand on his saber. How to watch men die and feel nothing but the distant thunder of his own heartbeat. But it had not taught him how to bury a wife, how to stand at the edge of a small grave beside a smaller one, how to place flowers on earth that held everything he had ever loved, Catalina, and the child who never drew breath. The fever had taken them both, while he fought in campaigns whose names he could no longer remember, for causes that seemed, now, like the arguments of strangers. He had returned to San Sebastian a hero, they said, decorated, honored. He had returned to an empty house and a priest who spoke of God's mysterious mercy. Now he rode north, toward the capital, carrying dispatches he did not care about, following orders that meant nothing. The road unwound before him like a gray ribbon through fields of sugarcane and coffee, past haciendas whose white walls caught the dying sun, past villages where children stopped their games to watch him pass. He rode because riding was what soldiers did. He rode because stillness had become unbearable. The first inn stood at the crossroads, where the mountain road began its long climb toward the passes. It was a low building of adobe and timber, its courtyard crowded with mules and the smell of roasting meat. Alejandro stabled his horse, paid for a room, and sat alone at a corner table, while the common room filled with the noise of merchants and muleteers. He was not hungry, but he ate. He was not tired, but he would sleep. These were the mechanical functions of a body that continued without permission, a heart that beat despite having no reason to. The innkeeper was a heavy man with kind eyes and a nervous manner. He brought wine without being asked, and bread still warm from the oven. "You travel the mountain road, Capitan?" Alejandro nodded. "Alone? I require no company." The innkeeper hesitated, wiping his hands on his apron. Around them, the conversation of the other travelers rose and fell like waves against a shore. "It is not my place to advise a soldier," he said carefully, "but there are those who wait until morning. The road through the Barranca de las Almas. It is not wise to travel by night." Alejandro lifted his gaze. The innkeeper's face held no mockery, only a peculiar earnestness that seemed out of place in a man who dealt daily with the rough traffic of the roads. "I have ridden through worse country than this. I do not doubt it, Capitan. But the Barranca is different. There is a bridge there. The Puente de los Suspiros, they call it. The Bridge of Sighs." He crossed himself quickly, a gesture so automatic it seemed involuntary. Men have been lost on that road. Good men. Men who knew the country. Bandits? No. Capitan. Not bandits? The innkeeper lowered his voice. "La Dama Blanca?" Alejandro said nothing. He had heard such stories before. In every village, every province, every corner of the country where darkness gathered and superstition flourished. White ladies and weeping women, phantom coaches and cursed crossroads. The peasantry filled the night with ghosts because they could not accept that the night was simply dark, simply cold, simply empty. "She walks the bridge," the innkeeper continued, mistaking silence for interest. "A woman in white. Beautiful, they say. More beautiful than any living woman. She appears to travelers, especially soldiers, especially men who carry sorrow. His eyes flickered to the black band Alejandro wore on his sleeve. She speaks softly. She warns them of danger. And then, the innkeeper shook his head. They are found in the river below. Or they are not found at all. Alejandro drained his wine and set the cup down with more force than necessary. I thank you for your concern, but I have seen death many times, and it has never worn a white dress. He rose, leaving coins on the table, and climbed the stairs to his room. Behind him, he heard the innkeeper murmuring to the other travelers, heard the quick susurrus of prayers and the clink of rosary beads. Let them pray. Prayer had never saved anyone he loved. He left before dawn, while the stars still burned cold and distant above the mountains. The road climbed steadily through pine forests that whispered in the wind, past waterfalls that caught the first gray light, past shrines to the Virgin where candles guttered in iron holders and flowers rotted in their clay pots. The Barranca announced itself gradually, first as a deepening of the shadows on the eastern side of the road, then as a gap in the trees that revealed, far below, the silver thread of a river winding through darkness. The air grew colder. The sounds of the forest, birdsong, the rustle of small creatures, faded into a silence that seemed deliberate, expectant. Alejandro had known silence like this before, on the eve of battles, in the moments before a charge. He dismissed the thought and rode on. The Bridge of Sighs appeared as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, throwing long shadows across the stone. It was older than he had expected. Colonial work, perhaps even older. The stones fitted together with a precision that spoke of forgotten craftsmen and vanished skills. Moss grew thick on its balustrades, and here and there the carved figures of saints stared out with blind eyes, their features worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind. At the center of the bridge, a stone cross rose toward the sky. Fresh flowers lay at its base, marigolds and white roses, their petals scattered by the wind. Alejandro stopped his horse and looked down. The river ran perhaps 200 feet below, a ribbon of white water over black stones. The sound of it reached him faintly, a constant whisper, like distant voices in an empty room. On either bank, the forest pressed close, dark and tangled, the trees leaning over the water as if listening. There was nothing here. No woman in white. No ghost. No curse. Only stone and water and the ordinary morning light. He clicked his tongue, and his horse moved forward. The sound of hooves on ancient stone echoed strangely, bouncing off the walls of the Barranca, multiplying into a rhythm that seemed almost like footsteps behind him. He did not look back. The mountain town of Santa Rosa lay 2 days beyond the bridge, a cluster of whitewashed buildings around a central plaza dominated by an old church whose bell tower rose against the sky like a dark finger pointed at heaven. Alejandro arrived as evening settled over the rooftops, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of church bells calling the faithful to vespers. He found lodging in a house near the plaza, a room that looked out over a courtyard where orange trees grew, and a fountain played its endless, mindless song. The woman who kept the house was elderly, dressed in black, her face a map of grief lines and patient endurance. "You came by the mountain road?" she asked as she brought him supper. "Yes." "Through the Barranca?" "Past the bridge?" "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes dark and knowing. "You did not see her." It was not a question. "I saw nothing but stone and water." The old woman nodded slowly. She does not show herself to all, only to those who carry something she recognizes. Grief, guilt, the weight of sins unconfessed. She paused. "You are a soldier." "I am." "Then you carry all these things. But perhaps Not yet enough. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. There is a priest here. Father Ignacio. He keeps the old records, knows the old stories. If you would understand what walks that bridge, speak to him. Alejandro had no intention of speaking to any priest. He had spoken to enough priests in his life, heard enough assurances of divine love and eternal mercy, enough explanations for suffering that explained nothing. But that night, he dreamed. He dreamed of the bridge in moonlight, the stones silver blue beneath a sky thick with stars. He dreamed of standing at its center, looking down at water that reflected not the sky but something else. A face, perhaps, or a shape that might have been a face, pale and beautiful and impossibly sad. He dreamed of a voice, soft as wind through pine needles, singing a lullaby he had not heard since childhood. He woke with tears on his face and the taste of river water in his mouth. Father Ignacio was younger than Alejandro had expected, perhaps 40, with the lean face and watchful eyes of a man who had seen more than sermons and sacraments. He received the Capitan in the small room behind the sacristy, where he kept his books and papers, the walls lined with leather-bound volumes, whose spines bore titles in Latin and Spanish, and languages Alejandro did not recognize. "You wish to know about La Dama Blanca," the priest said, without preamble. He gestured to a chair. "Sit." This is not a story to hear standing. Alejandro sat. Through the small window, he could see the church courtyard, the graves marked with iron crosses and stone angels, the flowers that wilted in the mountain sun. "You have crossed the bridge," Father Ignacio continued. "You have walked the road she walks. You have felt, perhaps, the weight of her attention." "Yes, I felt nothing but wind and cold, and yet you are here, asking questions. A soldier who does not believe in ghosts, seeking a priest who does." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "God works in mysterious ways, Capitan, even through skeptics. I am not interested in theology, only in facts." "Facts?" Father Ignacio leaned back in his chair. "Very well. Let us speak of facts. The bridge you crossed was built in 1647 by Spanish engineers, using stones quarried from the mountains and labor, conscripted from the local people. It was intended to connect the silver mines of the north with the ports of the south, a project of empire. A monument to progress." He paused. "It was also built over a place the local people considered sacred, or cursed. The words, in their language, were the same. You have studied this. I have spent 20 years studying it. The bridge, the Barranca, the woman who walks there. Would you like to know why?" Alejandro said nothing, but his silence was assent. Father Ignacio rose and moved to a shelf, pulling down a leather-bound journal whose pages had yellowed with age. He opened it carefully, as one might open a reliquary containing the bones of saints. This is the testimony of Father Sebastian Morales, parish priest of Santa Rosa from 1648 to 1671. He was present when the bridge was completed. He was present when the first deaths began, and he was the one who recorded what happened to Isabel de Vargas. The name hung in the air like incense, smoke. "Isabel de Vargas," Father Ignacio repeated softly. "La Dama Blanca. The woman who waits by the water. She had been beautiful." This much was recorded in multiple sources. The letters of colonial administrators, the diaries of travelers, the whispered memories passed down through generations of village women who remembered how their grandmothers had spoken of her. Dark hair that fell past her waist like a river of night. Eyes the color of honey in sunlight. Skin pale as milk. Remarkable in that country of bronze and copper tones. She moved, they said, like music made flesh, like a prayer given form. She was the daughter of a minor colonial official, raised in the manner of Spanish ladies. convent-educated, skilled in needlework and music, trained in the careful arts of virtue and submission. She came to Santa Rosa in 1649, when her father was appointed magistrate of the silver mines, and within a month, every eligible man in the province had found reason to visit the magistrate's house. But it was Diego Castellanos who won her heart. He was a captain in the colonial militia, son of a wealthy hacendado, possessed of the easy charm and casual cruelty that marked the ruling class of that era. He was not handsome in the classical sense. His face was too hard, his eyes too calculating, but he carried himself like a man who had never been denied anything he wanted. He wanted Isabel. And Isabel, raised to believe that love was a sacrament, and that the words of men were sacred bonds, believed that he wanted her as wife, as partner, as the mother of his children. They met in the gardens of the magistrate's house, in the shadowed corners of the church after Mass, on the bridge where she liked to walk in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Barranca. He spoke to her of passion and devotion, of a future they would build together, of love that would last beyond death itself. She gave him everything. The records are unclear, Father Ignacio said, about precisely what happened next. There are several versions. Father Sebastian's account suggests that Isabel became pregnant, that Diego, when informed, denied responsibility, that he had, in fact, been negotiating a marriage with the daughter of a wealthy mine owner, even as he whispered promises to Isabel in the moonlight. A common enough story, Alejandro said, though his voice had grown quiet. Common, yes. But the ending is not. The priest turned a page in the old journal. Isabel went to Diego's family. She went to the church. She went to her own father. No one would listen. Diego Castellanos was powerful, connected, necessary to the colonial administration. Isabel de Vargas was merely a woman who had allowed herself to be ruined. The blame, as always, fell upon her, and the child lost. Whether through violence or grief or deliberate intervention, the records do not say. But Isabel survived, for a time. She survived the shame and the abandonment, survived the silence of a God who seemed to have turned his face away, survived the wedding of Diego Castellanos to another woman, a wedding that the whole town attended while Isabel watched from the shadows of the church. Father Ignacio closed the journal. 3 days after the wedding, her body was found in the river below the bridge. She had jumped, they said, or she had been pushed, or she had simply walked into the water and let it take her. No one investigated. No one cared. She was buried in unconsecrated ground, without prayers, without rites. A suicide in a land where suicide was the unforgivable sin. And that is where the ghost story begins. That is where the truth becomes complicated. Father Ignacio returned to his chair, his hands folded as if in prayer. Within a week of Isabel's burial, Diego Castellanos was found dead on the bridge. Drowned, they said, though his body was discovered on the stones, far from the water. His face, according to witnesses, bore an expression of perfect peace, as if he had simply surrendered, as if he had wanted to die. Guilt, perhaps. But then another man died, a traveler who had stopped on the bridge at night, and another, always men, always alone, always found drowned or simply vanished. And always, before their deaths, they spoke of meeting a woman on the bridge, a beautiful woman in white, who warned them of danger, who wept for their sins, who asked them to stay with her just a little longer. Alejandro felt something cold move through his chest. Memory, perhaps, or something else. You are saying she kills them. I am saying she waits for them. What happens next? Father Ignacio spread his hands. Some say she is a demon wearing a dead woman's face. Some say she is an angel sent to test the faithful. Some say she is simply a soul trapped between heaven and hell, cursed to replay her tragedy until the end of time. He met Alejandro's eyes. I have spent 20 years trying to understand what she is. I have found no answer that satisfies. Yet, you remain here. Someone must keep the records. Someone must remember her name. The priest's voice softened. Someone must pray for her, even if prayer cannot save her. He should have continued north. The dispatches he carried were time-sensitive, his orders clear. But Alejandro found himself lingering in Santa Rosa, as days stretched into a week, visiting the church at odd hours, reading the old journals Father Ignacio made available to him, standing at the edge of the plaza at dusk, watching the shadows lengthen across the stones. He told himself it was rest. He told himself he was recovering strength for the journey ahead. He did not admit, even to himself, that he was waiting. The dreams continued. Each night they grew more vivid. The bridge in moonlight, the voice singing that half-remembered lullaby, the sense of being watched by eyes that held infinite sorrow and something else, something that might have been hunger or might have been hope. He began to recognize things in the dreams that he had not noticed while awake. The way the flowers at the cross's base were always fresh, as if someone tended them each night. The pattern of stars reflected in the water below, wrong somehow, as if the river reflected a different sky. The way the stone saints seemed to turn their heads as he passed, following him with their blind, worn eyes. On the 7th night, he rode back to the bridge. The moon hung full and silver over the Barranca, its light transforming the landscape into something strange and beautiful. The forest had gone quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of night creatures at rest, but the held-breath silence of things that watched and waited. The river below shone like molten silver, and the bridge itself seemed to glow with a pale luminescence that owed nothing to the moon. Alejandro dismounted at the bridge's entrance and led his horse forward on foot. The sound of hooves on stone seemed muffled, as if the air itself had grown thick, as if sound traveled differently in this place. He reached the center of the bridge and stopped. She stood at the far end. His first thought was that the stories had not lied about her beauty. She was exactly as the old accounts described, a woman in a long white gown that moved slightly in a wind he could not feel, dark hair drifting around her face like seaweed in slow water, skin so pale it seemed to emit its own faint light. His second thought was that beauty was not the right word. There was something too still about her, too perfect, like a painting or a statue that had stepped down from its frame. Her features were flawless in the way that a mask is flawless, without the small imperfections that mark living flesh. His third thought was that her eyes were open, and they were looking at him, and they held a grief so vast and deep that he felt his own sorrow rise up in response like a tide answering the moon. "You came back," she said. Her voice was exactly as he had heard it in dreams. Soft, musical, carrying across the distance between them, as if she stood at his shoulder rather than 30 feet away. "I came back," he agreed. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, thick and distant. Most do not. Most hear the stories and ride fast through the night, their prayers loud enough to wake the dead. A faint smile touched her lips, though it did not reach her eyes. The prayers do nothing. They never have. But the fear keeps them moving, and so they survive. "I am not afraid. No." She tilted her head, studying him with that ancient, sorrowful gaze. "You carry something heavier than fear. I can smell it on you. Grief and guilt, and something else. A wish, perhaps. A wish to stop carrying those burdens." Alejandro felt his chest tighten. "You know nothing about me. I know everything about you. I know about the wife who died while you were far away, playing at war. I know about the child who never drew breath, the son who would have had your eyes. I know how you stood at the grave and felt nothing but anger at God, at yourself, at the world that kept turning when yours had stopped. She had not moved, but she seemed closer somehow. The distance between them folding in ways that had nothing to do with physical space. I know how you ride because you cannot stand still. How you take every dangerous mission, hoping that this time something will stop you. How you lie awake at night and hear her voice calling you, and wonder if at the afterlife might not be better than this half-life you have left. Stop. Why? Her voice gentled. There is no shame in wanting rest. There is no shame in being tired. I was tired too once, before the water, before the silence. I was so tired of carrying a grief that no one else could see. Alejandro realized he had taken several steps forward. The bridge seemed longer than it had before, stretching out toward her like a path through darkness. The priest told me your story, he said. Isabel de Vargas. The man who betrayed you. Father Ignacio keeps the old records. He lights candles for me on the anniversary of my death. He is a kind man, that sad, distant smile again, but he does not understand. None of them do. They think I am a ghost, a curse, a warning to sinners. She shook her head slowly. I am something much simpler. I am just a woman who loved unwisely. A woman who trusted. A woman who discovered that love, in this world, is a wound that never heals. And the men you have taken, the travelers who disappear, they choose to stay. Every one of them. I hide nothing. I show them what I am, the cold, the dark, the water waiting below. And they step forward anyway, because what I offer is an end to carrying, an end to remembering, an end to waking each morning and discovering that the weight is still there, that the grief has not lessened, that time has healed nothing. She extended one pale hand toward him. You could stay, Alejandro. You could rest. The water is cold, but only for a moment. Then there is peace. Then there is silence. Then there is nothing at all. He looked at her hand. It was beautiful, the fingers long and slender, the nails like chips of pearl. Behind her, the far end of the bridge had vanished into mist, and the river's voice had risen from a whisper to something louder, something that sounded almost like singing. He thought of Catalina. He thought of the small grave beside the larger one. He thought of all the roads he had ridden since, all the battles he had sought, all the mornings he had woken and felt the crushing disappointment of still being alive. No, the word came from somewhere deeper than thought. It surprised him as much as it surprised her. No, she did not lower her hand. You want to. I can feel it. The part of you that is tired, the part that wants to stop, it is reaching for me even now. It is. But there are other parts. Alejandro forced himself to step backward, parts that remember what she felt like in my arms, what her voice sounded like when she laughed, parts that are not ready to let those memories become nothing. For a moment, something flickered in Isabel's eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition, or something older and stranger than either. You are stronger than most. I am not strong. I am simply not finished. She lowered her hand. The mist behind her thinned slightly, and the far end of the bridge became visible again. Ordinary stone, ordinary darkness, ordinary night. Go then. Continue your journey. Carry your grief a little farther. Her voice held no anger, only that vast, eternal sadness. But know this, I will be here. I am always here. And one day, when you are truly tired, when the weight becomes too heavy even for you, you will remember the peace I offer. And you will return Alejandro retreated step by careful step, never turning his back on her. Only when he reached his horse, only when he felt the familiar warmth of living flesh beneath his hands, did he allow himself to look away. When he looked back, she was gone, but the flowers at the foot of the stone cross were fresh, and the air still carried the faint perfume of roses mixed with river water. He told himself he would not return. He rode north through the passes, delivered his dispatches to the garrison at Veracruz, accepted new orders that would take him west toward the Pacific coast. The road wound through country he had never seen before. Jungle and swamp, mountains and desert, cities where the bells rang in languages he did not speak, and the faces of the saints wore features different from those he knew. But at night, always at night, he dreamed of the bridge. She came to him in different forms. Sometimes she was Isabel, as he had seen her, beautiful and terrible, offering her hand across the moonlit stone. Sometimes she was Catalina, his dead wife, her face soft with love and accusation, asking why he had left her, why he had not been there when the fever took her. Sometimes she was a child he had never known, a son with his eyes and Catalina's smile, reaching up to be held. He woke from these dreams with his heart pounding and the taste of river water on his tongue, and he knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that the connection formed that night on the bridge had not been broken. It was a thread, invisible and unbreakable, stretching across all the miles between them. And she was pulling. He began to notice things. A woman in white, at the edge of a crowd, watching him with dark eyes, vanishing when he turned to look. The sound of water where no water should be. In desert camps, in mountain barracks, in the quiet hours before dawn, the smell of roses at unexpected moments, carried on winds that blew from no discernible direction, and the deaths, not his own. He remained absurdly, infuriatingly alive, but others, men who traveled the roads he had traveled, soldiers from his regiment who rode back toward the capital, merchants, and priests and ordinary travelers who made the mistake of crossing the bridge in the Barranca at night. News reached him in fragments, in the gossip of garrison towns and the reports of provincial administrators. 3 men drowned in a month, 5 in a season. A patrol of soldiers found dead at their campsite near the bridge. No wounds visible, their faces bearing expressions of perfect peace. Bad water, the official said. Bandits, suggested others. The terrain is treacherous. Accidents happen. But Alejandro knew. He knew because every death pulled the thread tighter. He knew because every soul that stepped into her darkness fed something, sustained something, made the thing that waited on the bridge stronger and more hungry. He was not the only one she watched, but he was the only one she had released. And he began to understand, in the long nights of his journey, that release was not the same as freedom. The letter from Father Ignacio reached him in a garrison town on the Pacific coast, carried by a messenger who had ridden for 3 weeks through dangerous country. It was brief, the handwriting hurried. Capitán Mendoza, come back. Something has changed. She is more active than I have seen in 20 years. The deaths are increasing. There is a pattern to them now. She is not merely taking those who cross the bridge by chance. She is hunting. I believe you are connected to this. I believe your escape did something, opened something, or perhaps closed something off that needed to remain open. I cannot explain more in writing. Come back. If you ever hope to understand, if you ever hope to end this, now is the time. In Christ's name, Father Ignacio. Alejandro read the letter 3 times. He considered burning it. He considered ignoring it, continuing west, riding until he reached the sea and could ride no farther. Instead, he requested leave. He packed his saddlebags with supplies for a long journey, He paid his debts and wrote letters to no one, because there was no one left to write to. Then he turned his horse east, toward the mountains, toward the bridge that waited in moonlight, toward her. The journey took 2 weeks. The roads were worse than he remembered, washed out by autumn rains, treacherous with mud and fallen trees. Twice, he nearly lost his horse to slides that carried the path away without warning. 3 times, he stopped in villages where the people crossed themselves when he asked about the bridge. When he spoke the name, no one there would say aloud. La Dama, they called her, or simply Ella, her, as if even the word for woman, for lady, for white, carried too much power to speak. They told him of the deaths. The soldier who had been traveling to visit his family, found floating in the river with a smile on his face. The merchant, who had carried goods worth a fortune, discovered with his mules still packed, his body cold on the bridge's stones. The young priest sent to investigate the stories, who walked out onto the bridge one night to pray and was never seen again. They told him other things too, things whispered in corners, shared over cups of bitter coffee, offered like confessions to a man who would soon face the confessor himself. The water in the river had turned colder. Fish no longer swam there. Birds fell silent when they flew over the Barranca. A shepherd had seen lights on the bridge at midnight. Not torches or lanterns, but something different, a glow that moved with a woman's grace. And some said, though they would not swear to it, would not repeat it before a priest, that the thing on the bridge was no longer alone, that there were others now, shapes in white that flanked her, men who had followed her call and become part of whatever she was becoming. Alejandro listened to all of it. He believed all of it. And still, he rode on. He reached Santa Rosa on the evening of All Souls' Day, when the streets were lined with candles, and the cemetery gates stood open to welcome the returning dead. Father Ignacio met him at the church, older now, thinner, his eyes carrying a weight that had not been there before. You came. I received your letter. I prayed you would. The priest led him inside, to the small room where the old journals still lined the walls. But new volumes had been added, Ignacio's own records, filled with cramped handwriting and careful diagrams. I have been documenting everything. The deaths, the sightings, the patterns. What patterns? Father Ignacio spread several sheets of paper across the desk. They showed maps of the region marked with dates and locations. Look. The deaths cluster around certain dates. The anniversary of her death, the night Diego Castellanos was found, the feast days of martyred women. But since your visit, since the night you walked away from her, the pattern has changed. Changed how she is no longer waiting for men to come to her. She is reaching out. The deaths occur farther from the bridge, in villages, on distant roads, even in their beds. She is no longer bound to the bridge. The priest's hands shook slightly as he gathered the papers. I believe you did something that night. When you refused her, when you walked away, I believe you showed her that the curse can be broken, that the thread connecting her to this world can be stretched, can reach beyond the bridge. And I believe she is using that knowledge. She is learning to hunt. What do you want me to do? I want you to go back. Father Ignacio met his eyes. I want you to finish what you started. Either break the curse completely or bind it again. You're asking me to die. I am asking you to face her. What happens after? The priest looked away. That will be between you and her. And God, if he still watches over that place, the bridge waited for him as it had always waited. He arrived at midnight, the hour of her death. the hour when the veil between worlds thinned to gossamer. The moon hung full and silver, its light turning the mist over the river to something luminous, something that moved with its own slow purpose. His horse would not cross. It stopped at the bridge's entrance and refused to move further, its eyes rolling white, its breath coming in sharp, frightened bursts. Alejandro dismounted, tied the reins to a stone pillar, and walked forward alone. She was there, at the center of the bridge, but she was different. The white dress she wore was no longer simply white. It rippled with colors, gray and silver and the deep blue of water at night, shifting constantly, as if the fabric were made of mist rather than cloth. Her dark hair moved in currents no wind could explain, spreading around her head like a halo of shadows, and her skin, once merely pale, now seemed translucent, as if he could see through her to the darkness beneath. And she was not alone. They stood behind her, figures in white, their features blurred, their forms indistinct but recognizable as human, or once human, men who had followed her into the water, who had accepted her peace, who had become part of whatever she was becoming. "You came back," she said. Her voice was different too, deeper, layered, as if multiple voices spoke in perfect unison. "I knew you would. I have been waiting. So has Father Ignacio. He says you've changed. Changed." She tilted her head, and for a moment, she looked almost amused. "I have grown. Expanded. The curse that bound me to this bridge, I thought it was a prison, but it was also a seed. And you, Alejandro, when you walked away, you showed me that the seed could sprout, that I could reach beyond these stones. You're hunting now. Taking men who never came to the bridge. They still come. Not physically, not yet, but in their dreams, in their grief, in the moments between midnight and dawn when the heart is weakest." Her smile was beautiful and terrible. "You taught me that when you dreamed of me, when you heard my voice across all those miles. You showed me that the thread between us could stretch, that I could find others, that I could offer peace to those who needed it. Wherever they were, it's not peace. It's death. Is there a difference?" She spread her hands, and the figures behind her shifted, moved closer, their pale shapes flickering at the edges like candle flames in a draft. "These men came to me willingly. They accepted what I offered. They are at rest now. No more grief, no more guilt, no more waking in darkness and wondering why they are still alive. They are not at rest. They are trapped in what is life but another kind of trap." She stepped toward him, and with each step, the bridge seemed to narrow, the night to deepen, the sound of the river to grow louder. "You know this. You have known it since the day you stood at your wife's grave. The world is a prison, Alejandro. The body is a cell. I am simply offering an exit." She was close now. Close enough that he could see the ancient sorrow in her eyes, the grief that had curdled over centuries into something cold and hungry. "Stay with me," she whispered. "I have waited so long for someone who understands. Someone who carries what I carry. Someone who knows that love is not salvation, but curse. That devotion leads only to betrayal. That the heart is not a sanctuary, but a wound that never heals." He felt the pull of her. Not just her voice, not just her beauty, but something deeper. The thread between them, the connection formed that night when he had first seen her, hummed with a terrible resonance. Part of him wanted to step forward. Part of him wanted to let go of the weight he carried, to surrender to the cold and the silence and the peace she promised. But another part remembered. Catalina, he said. The name hung between them like a talisman. She loved me. Not wisely. She knew I was dangerous, knew I was flawed, knew I would leave and might not come back, but she loved me anyway. And when she died, he took a breath. When she died, she was not afraid. The priest told me she was not afraid, and she was not angry, and she did not curse my name. Her last words were a prayer for my safety. How touching. You don't understand. He met her eyes. Those ancient, sorrowful, hungry eyes. I thought grief was a wound. I thought love was a curse. But Catalina, she showed me that grief is what remains when love leaves the room. It is not the absence of love. It is its echo, its legacy. The proof that something real once existed between two people. Words, Isabel said, and her voice had hardened. Pretty words to cover ugly truths. No, true words, difficult words. He did not step back, but neither did he step forward. You were betrayed, Isabel. You were wronged. The man you loved was a monster, and the world that should have protected you abandoned you instead. Your grief is real. Your anger is justified. But what you have become, what have I become? Something that feeds on the grief of others. Something that takes the echo of love and smothers it. Something that offers not peace but emptiness and calls it mercy. She was very still. Behind her, the white figures shifted restlessly. You think you understand me, she said. You think because you have lost, because you have suffered, you know what it is to stand on this bridge for centuries, watching men come and go, watching them fear you and pray against you and tell stories about you to frighten their children. You know nothing. I know that Diego Castellanos died on this bridge. I know that you took him. I did. Did it help? The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Did killing him heal you? Did watching him step into the water fill the emptiness inside you? Did his death bring you 1 inch closer to peace? For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something that looked almost like doubt. It was justice, she said. It was vengeance. And then you took another, and another, and another, and every soul you claimed. Every man you pulled into the water. Did any of them fill the void he left? Did any of them give you what you lost? Stop. You have been feeding for 200 years, Isabel, and you are still hungry. You are still waiting. You are still standing on this bridge in the moonlight, looking for something that is never going to come. Because what you lost cannot be replaced by taking. It cannot be recovered through death. It cannot be filled by emptiness. What would you have me do? Her voice cracked, and for a moment, he heard in it not the layered chorus of the cursed thing she had become, but the simple broken voice of a woman who had loved unwisely and paid the price. I cannot leave. I cannot rest. Heaven has turned its face away, and hell will not have me. What would you have me do? Alejandro reached into his coat and drew out a rosary. It was old. Catalina's, given to her by her mother. Given to her mother by the grandmother who had survived a shipwreck, clutching it to her chest. It was not magic. It held no power that he knew of. But it was a symbol, a connection, a thread that bound him to someone who had loved him despite everything. Remember, he said, not the betrayal, not the death, not the curse. Remember what it felt like before. Remember when you were Isabel de Vargas, a girl who believed in love. Remember that you were human once, and that human hearts, even broken ones, are capable of grace. He held out the rosary. Take this. Not as a weapon against you, not as a symbol of a God who abandoned you, but as a reminder that love once existed in you, that it might exist still. that the seed of what you were has not been entirely consumed by what you have become. She stared at the rosary. Her hand trembled, actually trembled, as if the curse that held her had loosened for just a moment. "If I take that," she whispered, "I will remember everything. The joy, the hope, the moment he first smiled at me, all of it. Yes, it will hurt. Yes, more than drowning, more than centuries of waiting, more than any pain I have ever known. Yes." She reached out. Her fingers, pale as bone, closed around the beads. The dawn came slowly over the Barranca, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The mist over the river burned away in the warming light, and the stones of the bridge, ancient and patient, began to glow with the colors of morning. Alejandro stood alone at the center of the bridge. Isabel was gone. The figures in white were gone. The thread that had connected them, that had stretched across miles and months, had finally snapped. But as he turned to leave, he saw the flowers at the foot of the stone cross. Fresh flowers, marigolds and white roses, and among them, something he had not noticed before. A small stone marker, weathered by time, bearing a single name, Isabel, and below the name, carved in letters, almost too worn to read, "Amada, traicionada, perdonada, beloved, betrayed, forgiven." He knelt and touched the stone. It was warm beneath his fingers, as if something living had recently rested there. "I hope you find peace," he said softly. "Real peace. The kind that does not require taking." There was no answer. There would never be an answer. But as he rose and walked toward his waiting horse, he thought he heard, just for a moment, the faint echo of a lullaby carried on the morning wind. And for the first time in a long time, the sound did not fill him with dread. The road from the bridge wound down through forests, awakening with birdsong, past villages where the church bells were beginning to ring for morning mass, past fields where farmers looked up from their work and watched the solitary rider pass without comment or concern. Alejandro did not look back. He carried his grief still. Would carry it always, he knew, until his own death released him. But the weight had shifted somehow. It was no longer a stone pressing down on his chest, but something else. A presence, perhaps. A companion. The echo of a love that had been real, that had mattered, that had made him who he was. Catalina was gone. The child was gone. But they had existed. They had loved. And that love, that terrible, beautiful, undeserved love, was not erased by death. It lived on in him, in his memories, in the way he moved through the world. It was, he understood now, the only kind of immortality that mattered. In the village of Santa Rosa, Father Ignacio noted the date in his journal and put down his pen. The night had passed without incident. No deaths, no disappearances, no reports of a woman in white walking the bridge. For the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to hope. He closed the journal and went to the church, where the candles still burned for the souls of the dead. He lit one more. For Isabel, for Alejandro, for all those who walked in darkness and sought a light to guide them home. The flame burned steady and bright. And somewhere, in the space between night and morning, between curse and forgiveness, between the water and the sky, a woman in white stood on a bridge and watched the sun rise, and did not weep, and did not wait, and slowly, slowly began to let go. The end of the story. Thank you for listening to La Dama Blanca, the woman who waits by the water. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, keep your salt lines drawn.